Have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the July 1st, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are: the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ Composite rose 15% and 21% respectively during the second quarter, posting their best quarter each since 2020. The Dow gained 13%, its best quarter since 2022. Comcast move to split itself into two creates the next steel magnet in an entertainment industry that is poised for another consolidation. J.P. Morgan has filed a motion in a federal court to vacate the $4.25 million award to a former wealth advisor who was fired for expensing a $642.50 Super Bowl deli platter in a case known as the Salami Incident. Private equity firms iVest Consumer Partners and Cloverlay have sold the Care Bears brand of plush toys and related rights to Authentic Brands Group. Mystery traders used advanced knowledge of a Chinese brokerage crackdown to make more than $100 million in profit from options trades, an electronic trading firm alleged in a lawsuit. Ford is recalling more than 740,000 vehicles because of a transmission and parking system issue. J. Sainsbury backed its full-year guidance, but warned the impact of the Middle East conflict is uncertain. Nike recorded another sales decline in the latest quarter as it continued to hit hurdles with weakness in China. Dish, DBS, the satellite pay TV provider under Charlie Ergen's EchoStar broadcast empire, filed for bankruptcy after a deal to sell spectrum to AT&T was held up. BP said its deputy chief executive, Carol Howell, plans to retire later this year. Now for the key articles under the Worldwide section. The Supreme Court struck down Trump's attempt to curtail birthright citizenship, a rejection of his most aggressive crackdown on illegal immigration. The justices rejected federal limits on how much money political parties can spend in coordination with candidates for public office. The court also ruled that states can ban transgender women and girls from playing on female sports teams. Trump's forays into cryptocurrency delivered him a windfall of more than $1 million last year, according to his latest financial disclosure report, an unprecedented surge in income. The Trump administration and Anthropic reached an agreement to restore access to Fable, the company's most recent general access artificial intelligence model. Warren Buffett is skipping his usual mid-year donation to the Gates Foundation until seeing findings of a review into the foundation's ties to Jeffrey Epstein. 3 egg producers settled antitrust claims by donating more than 50 million eggs to food banks and paying $3.3 million to states that investigated them. The FAA is preparing to mandate the use of technology that would help pilots see nearby aircraft, a fix that safety advocates have sought since a deadly mid-air collision last year. GOP Representative Tom Keene Jr., who was absent from the Capitol for nearly 4 months, disclosed that he had been diagnosed with depression. A power struggle between civilian leaders and hardline military officials inside Tehran is threatening U.S.-Iran peace talks, officials familiar with the negotiations say. Trump has weighed a return to all-out war with Iran, but decided to stick with diplomatic talks, according to senior U.S. officials familiar with the discussions. Saudi pushback forced the U.S. to abort Project Freedom in May. According to U.S. officials familiar with the matter, ending the military operation to guarantee safe passage for ships launched hours earlier. The picture on today's front page shows quite a crowded lineup of cars trying to enter a gas station. And that caption reads, "Long wait." Motorists line up Tuesday at a gasoline station in Moscow. A relentless Ukrainian drone campaign targeting oil refineries has brought the war home for ordinary Russians, posing a new political challenge for President Vladimir Putin. And the headline, Russia's fuel shortages pressure Putin. Russia plans gas imports, ban on diesel exports as lines at pumps grow. By Yaroslav Trofimov. Fuel shortages across Russia have triggered a new political challenge for President Vladimir Putin as a relentless Ukrainian drone campaign aimed at the country's oil refineries has brought the war home for most ordinary Russians. While Ukraine has targeted Russian energy facilities for years, the quantity and firepower of Ukrainian drones and missiles have risen. This has allowed Kyiv to hit refineries as far as Tumen, 1,200 miles away in Siberia, and permitted the spectacular raid that broke through thick layers of air defenses and destroyed Moscow's main refinery on June 18th, the turning point of the crisis. Some 28% of Russia's refining capacity was offline as of June 20th, estimated Sergei Volkolenko, former head of strategy at Gazprom-Neft, a large Russian oil company, and a senior fellow at the Carnegie Russia Eurasian Center in Berlin. All of this is due to the steep rise in the number of drones that Ukraine is able to fire, he said. The problem isn't in logistical difficulties or market imbalances anymore, Vakulenko added, but in the physical lack of fuel. For the first time in decades, Russia is planning to start importing fuel. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Tuesday, adding that Moscow is negotiating with several nations that he declined to name. Only faraway refiners, such as those in India, could fill the enormous gap. Such imports would take weeks to arrive by sea and would further stretch Russia's budget, already consumed by war expenses. Once one of the world's main exporters of petroleum products, Russia has banned exports of gasoline and jet fuel for months as Ukrainian attacks intensified. On Sunday, Putin said he is considering a ban on exporting diesel. Court upholds birthright citizenship. Justices, 6-3, rebuff Trump's effort to curtail who can claim to be an American. By James Ramasser, Washington. The Supreme Court on Tuesday struck down President Trump's attempt to curtail birthright citizenship, rejecting an audacious anti-immigration initiative to reinterpret the constitutional principle that almost everyone born on U.S. soil is a citizen. The decision, written by Chief Justice John Roberts, said the long-standing guarantee of citizenship was deeply rooted in the nation's history, even before it was enshrined in the Constitution in 1868. Citizenship, then and now, was the right to have rights, to freely participate in our political community, Roberts wrote. The framers of the 14th Amendment extended that promise to every free-born person in this land. We keep that promise today. 6 justices, Roberts and 2 other conservatives, and 3 liberals ruled against the Republican president, though only 5 did so on constitutional grounds. The court's 3 most conservative justices dissented. The case challenged an executive order that Trump issued on the first day of his second term. It posited that future children born in the U.S. wouldn't be considered citizens if their parents were living in the country illegally or were visiting the country on temporary visas. The executive order never took effect. It was quickly blocked by multiple lower courts because it appeared to conflict with the 14th Amendment, which states that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. The order also seemed to contravene an 1898 Supreme Court decision that confirmed that U.S.-born children of immigrant parents are entitled to U.S. citizenship. The Trump administration appealed the lower court rulings, contending that the 14th Amendment citizenship provision had been misunderstood for more than a century. The administration argued that the drafters of the amendment, which was ratified in 1868, were focused on guaranteeing citizenship for the children of former slaves, and that the amendment was never intended to extend citizenship to children of people who were in the country without authorization. The president also said that narrowing birthright citizenship was necessary to prevent birth tourism, the practice of immigrants coming to the U.S. to give birth here and obtain citizenship for their child. The trouble is that there is scant evidence for this dramatically revisionist view, the Chief Justice wrote in a 26-page opinion. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. S&P NASDAQ Post Best Quarter Since 2020 by Crystal Herr. The S&P 500 and NASDAQ Composite powered through a turbulent few months to log their best quarter since 2020. The largest oil shock in history, worries about the longevity of the artificial intelligence boom, and the prospect of higher interest rates haven't derailed the records. The market overcame those headwinds, fueled by high-flying chip stocks that are the biggest AI winners of the moment, as well as confidence that U.S. companies will continue to churn out higher profits. Many think those same forces could lift the major indexes for the rest of the year. Thomas Carroll, equity strategist at Stifel, recently raised his price target for the S&P 500 to 7,800, up around 4% from Tuesday's closing level. But Carroll still expects more of the same volatility that has interrupted the market's overall climb. The S&P 500 has advanced or declined at least 1% during more than 1/4 of this year's trading sessions. According to Dow Jones market data, it's going to be incredibly volatile, which makes our jobs more fun, he said. The S&P 500 and NASDAQ Composite rose 15% and 21%, respectively, during the second quarter. It was the best quarter for both since 2020. The Dow Jones Industrial Average had its best quarter since 2022, rising 13%. J.P. Morgan stokes defense industry. Diamond puts banks' own funds into national security sector, pledges broad expansion. By Alexander Saidi. On a tour of a Huntsville, Alabama missile factory last fall, J.P. Morgan Chase Chief Executive Jamie Dimon nodded along as L3 Harris executives explained why they need help building more of the expensive rocket motors for badly needed Tomahawk and Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD, missiles. L3 Harris relies on procurement from the federal government, which can be stop and go, explained Ken Benningfield, the company's chief financial officer. Without enough capital, L3 Harris can't just build the motors at scale and have them on hand to sell later. The frustration comes as the U.S. faces a shortfall in weapon stocks, made even more dire since the war with Iran. The discussion helped crystallize a broader idea Dimon had been pondering about J.P. Morgan's role in national defense and about his own legacy. People familiar with the matter said, J.P. Morgan, the biggest bank in America, has long lent money to and advised the defense industry. Now Dimon would start investing the bank's own money, usually used for commercial and consumer lending or invested in treasury bonds, into buying stock in the firms. It's an inherently riskier strategy, but also potentially more profitable. Soon after the factory visit, Diamond said the bank would use $10 billion of its capital to invest directly into companies the bank has defined as critical to national security and economic self-sufficiency. Old School Debt Keeps Seniors from Retiring by Owen Adedoyan. Chris and Carolyn McAuliffe are in their 60s but don't expect to retire anytime soon. They're still paying off their student loan debt, which has ballooned to $500,000. I regret going to college, said Chris, an engineer for a health insurance company. When they earned their graduate degrees decades ago, the couple owed a combined $114,000 in student loans. With stable careers, Carolyn in nursing, they stayed on top of their monthly payments. Then they bought a house and had 2 children, and money got tight. So they consolidated their loans and opted for a payment plan that lowered their monthly bill. That extended the life of their loan, and compounding interest charges kept pushing up their balance. Student loans are increasingly following Americans into their 60s and rewriting what they believed would be their retirement years. More than 3 million people 62 and older owe federal student loans, up from 1.8 million in 2018, according to Education Department data. Delinquency rates among older borrowers have skyrocketed too, in some cases because they are on fixed incomes or have medical expenses. Baby boomers with federal student loans owe an average of about $45,000, more than 3 times that of borrowers 24 years old and younger, who owe about $13,800 on average. Now leaving the front page for other articles within the paper. The coach who has U.S. soccer believing, why not us right now? Mauricio Pochettino aims to lead the U.S. to its first knockout round win since 2002 World Cup, by Joshua Robinson and Andrew Beaton. Shortly after Mauricio Pochettino became head coach of the U.S. men's national team, he took a long look at the pool of players he would be charged with leading into the World Cup. He wondered just what he had gotten himself into. A former defender for the Argentine national team, who had coached some of the biggest clubs in Europe, Pochettino couldn't help but feel that the culture was a little loose and this group a little soft for the hard-nosed soccer he wanted to play. We were so naive when we signed our contract, he told reporters recently. It was worse than we really believed. But that's precisely why U.S. Soccer was willing to pay millions for Pochettino's services in 2024. If anyone could whip the Americans into shape in under 2 years and stave off potential embarrassment on home soil, it was him. Everywhere he'd worked, Pochettino had built a reputation for grueling training sessions and settling for nothing less than maximum intensity from his players, even if it drove them absolutely crazy. And as the U.S. prepares for a bruising test against Bosnia and Herzegovina for a place in the round of 16, it took a fiery Argentine to remind the Americans how to represent their country. Even though he's Argentinian, he has that mindset. Midfielder Sebastian Bernhalter said, "This is what we do, this is who we are, and this is what America is about." After the U.S. notched 2 victories in the group stage for the first time since 1930, Pochettino already has fans dreaming of a deep run. And in his eyes, success would be nothing less than hoisting the trophy on July 19th in New Jersey. It might be unlikely. The U.S. hasn't won a knockout round game in 24 years and has a potential path that runs through Spain and France. But Pochettino, 54, has spent months drilling a 3-word phrase into his players: why not us? Ford recalls more than 740,000 vehicles by Joseph D. Avila. Ford Motor is recalling more than 740,000 vehicles because of a transmission and parking system issue, according to federal regulators. Some of the company's vehicles have transmission defects that could cause them to engage the park function while in motion, potentially damaging the vehicle's parking system. The U.S. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration said in a recall notice that could lead to the vehicle rolling away while it's in park. The recall covers certain Expedition, Navigator, Explorer, Aviator, F-150 models from the years 2018 to 2021. The recall covers 741,195 vehicles, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration said. Dealers will update vehicle software and inspect and replace any damaged transmission components free of charge, the federal regulator said. FAA weighs sweeping aircraft technology ruling by Andrew Tangell. Federal aviation regulators are preparing to mandate the use of technology that would help pilots see nearby aircraft, a fix that safety advocates have sought since a deadly mid-air collision in Washington, D.C. last year. The Federal Aviation Administration mandate would require nearly all aircraft in civilian airspace to broadcast information such as their location, direction, and call sign through the automatic dependent surveillance broadcast systems, people familiar with the matter said. The aircraft tracking technology has 2 components, ABS-B in and ABS-B out. Many aircraft, such as those operated by commercial carriers, are already required to broadcast their location information via ADS-B out. The potential new mandate is expected to apply to military and other aircraft and in more swaths of U.S. civilian airspace, the people said. Aircraft would also be required to have ADS-B in, which would enable pilots to see information from other planes nearby to avoid collisions. President briefed on all-out war, sticks with Iran talks by Alexander Ward and Laura Sigelman, Washington. President Trump has weighed a return to all-out war with Iran, holding multiple conversations in recent days with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Dan Kane on more strikes, but has decided to stick with diplomatic talks for now, according to U.S. officials familiar with the discussion. The conversations have centered on whether the U.S. should abandon negotiations and resume full-scale attacks on Iran, the officials said, a move some of them described as finishing the job. While not making a final decision, Trump has told aides he believes another round of full-scale attacks could derail diplomacy and hurt Washington's chances of ultimately dismantling Iran's nuclear program. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, Trump loses on birthright citizenship. The consensus view wins out amid varied conservative dissents. President Trump's push to redefine birthright citizenship was legal revisionism, as his administration admitted, and on Tuesday it lost at the Supreme Court. Chief Justice John Roberts, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, and the three liberals instead cemented the orthodox view of the 14th Amendment, while the dissents highlight the varieties of conservative originalism. Trump versus Barbara. The chief's opinion for the majority tells a straightforward story. The young American nation, with little fanfare, adopted the British view of citizenship as based on birth within the territory, which soon applied to the children of tens of thousands of immigrants from the Old World. That promise was abrogated by the Supreme Court's 1857 decision in Dred Scott, then restored after the Civil War by the 14th Amendment. Its text says, all persons born in the U.S. and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens. In an 1898 case, the justices recognized citizenship for a man born to Chinese parents in San Francisco. What the court held in Wam Kim Ark was simple, the chief says. The citizenship clause incorporated the common law and granted citizenship to nearly all children born in the United States. Exceptions are few, such as for children of foreign diplomats who have immunity from U.S. law. When Mr. Trump issued his executive order last year, purporting to end birthright citizenship for children of illegal aliens and temporary visitors, it was a challenge to that old consensus, as even the Solicitor General acknowledged. But the prevailing view is correct, the chief says. The distinctions made by Mr. Trump's order, mother, father, lawful, temporary, are absent from the 14th Amendment. Four conservative justices disagree. A dissent by Justice Clarence Thomas, joined by Justice Neil Gorsuch, argues the original understanding of birthright citizenship depended on a person's domicile or fixed home. Citizens, Justice Thomas writes, were the permanent members of the body politic, the people whose roots were in a place, who called that place home, and who would, if necessary, go to war for that place. This view would exclude birth tourists who have no real ties to America. But how about illegal aliens who have lived in the United States for years? I would reserve for another day the question whether the children of illegal aliens can be domiciled here. Justice Thomas says in a footnote. In a separate dissent, Justice Gorsuch sounds like they could qualify as citizens. If those parents are not domiciled here, then where are they domiciled? Justice Samuel Alito, dissenting solo, argues the 14th Amendment confers citizenship on only those children who, at birth, owe allegiance solely to this country. He calls the court's ruling a serious mistake because it invites entry to the United States by most of the world and forecloses democratic responses on that matter. That leaves Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who also disagrees with the majority on the constitutional issue. But he says the court should have issued a narrower ruling since federal laws from 1940 and 1952 codified the consensus view of birthright citizenship. So Mr. Trump's order is illegal. Justice Kavanaugh's middle way would allow for legislative limits on birthright citizenship that after Tuesday are probably unconstitutional. Across 194 pages of opinions, the conservative justices use textualism and originalism to arrive at starkly different conclusions about the meaning of the 14th Amendment. They can't all be correct, yet their writings again refute the idea that this Supreme Court has any kind of lockstep mega majority. An interesting counterfactual is how the justices might have come out on a narrower order if Mr. Trump had tried to end birthright citizenship for transients alone. He took the advice of those who recommended an expansive constitutional challenge because he thought the issue was a political winner, and his defeat is all the greater for it. While birthright citizenship has certainly been abused, one positive result of Tuesday's ruling is that today's dreamers will give birth to citizens rather than a second generation living in limbo. The ability to assimilate newcomers has always been an American strength, while falling birth rates will soon make that an even greater American advantage. If birth tourism is as big a problem as Mr. Trump says, he can make a sustained case for a constitutional amendment. From the opinion pages, happy days again for TV news. If streaming platforms give news a future, outlets will want to be trusted again. By Holman W. Jenkins, Jr. We live in a time of rapid technological and social change, has said everybody since the Industrial Revolution 3 centuries ago. Perspective tends especially to fail when the industry charged with producing hysteria about change undergoes change itself. Here's some perspective. CNN and CBS News, soon to be joined under a common parent company, have a combined nightly audience of 5 million, half a Joe Rogan podcast audience. When Walter Cronkite anchored the CBS Evening News, roughly 13% of Americans tuned in nightly. Now, on certain nights, it's less than 1%. Comcast, which previously disposed of MSNBC and CNBC, on Monday announced plans to dispose of NBC Universal including NBC News, which introduced America's first scheduled TV news broadcast in February 1940. This is not about separating what we built together, prevaricated Comcast co-CEO Brian Roberts, explaining a deal that's all about separating what was previously put together. Comcast stock, dead money for years, promptly surged, and it wasn't because shareholders were thrilled about the remaining quasi-monopoly broadband business, which is being eaten alive by wireless competition. Nor did the stock leap because investors were delighted the founding Roberts clan will continue to award itself disproportionate control over both companies. If they want to see the stock pop, remove the voting rights lockup. The spinoff is sad face-saving for a failed content plus distribution strategy, but there's hope for an even greater realism potentially to win out. Netflix or another streaming winner could barge in to buy the choice bits first. These include NBC Universal's theme parks and studios, possibly even the ancient broadcast network thanks to its embedded sports right. Example, NFL. And NBC News, an afterthought, if not a red-headed stepchild. Though expect affronted fellow media outlets to freak out because of what NBC News once was, not what it is. That said, Comcast did one shrewd thing. In previously getting rid of CNBC and MSNBC, it wisely stripped the NBC brand from the disreputable liberal propaganda channel, renamed MS Now, while leaving its name on the business channel, whose viewers can be counted on to require continued, intelligent, reliable reporting. Of course, in better days, NBC would never have let its brand be devalued by MSNBC in the first place. Never mind, the renaming signals a belief there may be value in the NBC broadcast news brand yet. Today's news businesses are so devalued economically, it's hard to see how they deserve even the antitrust attention they get. But paranoiacs were particularly misguided to oppose the now approved CNN and CBS News combination. At least the Trump-friendly Ellison family proclaimed a desire to invest in news, which could potentially matter long after Mr. Trump is gone. Comcast's two-step to restore luster to the NBC News brand is similarly propitious. Among legacy networks, NBC was already the best match for Netflix, less stuffy than CBS News, less adventurous and jazzy than ABC News, at least by the images the three news divisions cultivated in their heyday. Not buying it? Time-honored franchises are Netflix's most neuralgic lack. Plus, to imagine the streamer will keep digging deeper into live sports without one day also adopting live news seems unbelievable. The opportunity is actually sizable when prestige value is weighed against the occasional displays of courage news ownership involves. There is, you may be surprised to learn, little evidence to suggest Americans are less well-informed about current events than they were when 75% of households watched one of the nightly news broadcasts. but a lot more diversity in sources has come with a lot less certainty about which are trustworthy. Brands, including new brands, are about trust. Trust is why the world unhesitatingly guzzles a dark, mysterious liquid that might otherwise appear toxic because it bears the Coke brand. Nobody will rightly understand 2016 to 19 without understanding that, for a time, major news brands stopped caring whether a story was true as long as the audience wanted it bad enough and was willing to pay for it. A rolling of heads might once have been automatic as a result of pressure from shareholders, viewers, and society at large. Nobody considers it even possible that Mr. Roberts or another senior executive might step down over his news division's performance in the collusion fiasco. Never mind scathing dissections that very belatedly came from other reputable news outlets. Okay, water over the dam. Clawing back respectability is the new imperative on the horizon. Count on it. Witness the proposed acquisition of Roku by the parent of Fox News. This further lays the groundwork for a promising post-cable future for traditional branded news in the streaming era. Being on a platform with a future means, guess what? Having a future. When the news industry senses it has a future again, it will want to be trusted again. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. A divided country celebrates its anniversary again. America's mood wasn't much happier at the bicentennial or the 1876 centennial, for that matter. By Jason L. Riley. America is celebrating the 250th anniversary of its founding later this week, yet citizens are in a sour mood. Not to worry, we've been here before. More than 57% of adults disapprove of the president's job performance, according to the Real Clear Politics polling average, which is up from 50% a year ago. Congressional job approval sits around 20%, and only 35% of Americans think the country is headed in the right direction. Citing recent survey results, the Associated Press last month reported that only about 1/4 of Americans say the U.S. stands above all other countries in the world, and about 3 in 10 say there are better countries than the U.S., an increase from 19% in an AP-NORC poll conducted in June 2016. Such sentiments are unfortunate, and they are unlikely to improve in the short run. President Trump's indecisiveness in Iran will only make the conflict less popular and more economically destabilizing. The midterm elections in November will feature bitterly contested races in Maine, Michigan, Georgia, Texas, and elsewhere that are sure to draw national attention. At best, July 4th will serve as a much-needed but temporary reprieve from the extreme partisanship and nonstop negativity that have characterized our political debates for more than a decade. It's also an opportunity to reflect on the political circumstances surrounding previous landmark anniversaries of our independence. When America celebrated its bicentennial, President Gerald Ford's approval rating hovered around 45%, according to Gallup, and only 24% of Americans viewed Congress favorably. The Vietnam War and the Watergate scandal were fresh memories. The 1973 to 75 economic recession was the deepest since the late 1950s. Ford had never been elected president or vice president, so he had no national political base. His decision to pardon Richard Nixon may have been an admirable attempt to unite the country and move on, but it backfired on him politically, and his popularity plummeted. In his book, Centennial, historian Fergus Borwich writes that America's 100th birth coincided with a time of industrial turbulence, political anxiety, and rapid change. The Panic of 1873 had sparked the worst depression in U.S. history to date, and 3 years later the nation had yet to recover. Ulysses Grant was serving his second term as president, and his administration had been hobbled by corruption scandals. Grant advocated black civil rights, but political support for Reconstruction was waning due to economic uncertainty and political resistance in the South. Americans were still struggling with difficult questions that would shape the nation's life and politics for generations to come. Mr. Bordwich writes, "Could the political parties ever be cleansed of corruption? What place would African Americans have in American society? Would Native Americans survive at all? And at what cost to their embattled cultures?" July 4th also marks the 200th anniversary of the death of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. The two founding fathers and former presidents had been political rivals, but famously reconciled in their later years. By the 50th anniversary of Jefferson's crowning achievement, he was already anxious about where the young nation was headed. Jefferson was frightened by the popularity of Andrew Jackson, regarding him as a man of violent passions and unfit for the presidency. Gordon Wood writes in his History of the Founding. The radicalism of the American Revolution, Jefferson was also overwhelmed by the new paper money business culture sweeping through the country, and never appreciated how much his democratic and egalitarian principles had contributed to its rise. As happens from time to this day, Jefferson also began to have doubts about the capabilities of everyday Americans in whom he, Adams, and other revolutionary leaders had placed so much confidence. Adams would have none of it. No revolutionary, Wood writes, defended with more vehemence common ordinary people against the aristocracy, against being ridden like horses, fleeced like sheep, worked like cattle, and fed and clothed like swine and hounds. Jefferson was an early admirer of the French Revolution, but he and other founders later saw it as a cautionary tale of how democracy without restraints on majoritarianism can lead to dictatorship and tyranny. The U.S. Constitution's system of checks and balances reflects a tragic view of human nature, an understanding that no one can be entirely trusted with power. Why has government been instituted at all? Alexander Hamilton wrote in the Federalist Papers. Because the passions of men will not conform to the dictates of reason and justice without constraint. The founders gifted us a new social order, a sturdy framework of governance that has endured malfeasance, incompetence, and division. Though far from perfect, it has improved over time and become the envy of the world. Remember that as some use this milestone to chronicle the nation's shortcomings and others to whitewash the past. The Pepper and Salt cartoon takes place in what appears to be a psychologist's office, where a man is laying on a couch with his face covered by his hands, as the psychologist asks, "When did you first begin to notice the voices telling you to invest in that stock?" Letters to the editor, the topic, Public Housing is misnamed. Regarding your editorial, Zoran Mandani, Slumlord, June 24th, when did taxpayers realize that public housing in New York and other cities isn't designed for tenants? Instead, it serves politicians, unions, and a circular financial system that helps Democrats retain power. The public's only role is to be perpetually fleeced for funding. From George Marshall, Marietta, Georgia. New topic, U.S. capitalism isn't broken. Regarding Walter Russell Mead's China's ambitious AI blueprint, Washington should remember that China has consistently trailed the U.S. in genuine technological innovation, a deficit likely exacerbated by state intervention. As America looks for ways to stay ahead of China rather than mimicking its top-down model, the U.S. should remain committed to capitalism, which established its global tech leadership. From Thomas Wilson, San Diego. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the July 1st, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening.